Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
Bandwidth for Know-How is brought to you by Cachefly at CACHEFLY.com.
Today we're messing with Linux.
When you watch Know-How, you're going to know how to resurrect that old PC with Linux. Mooncat said, why am I doing a chicken? And that's not a chicken, that's a penguin.
Well, yes, of course.
I'm Tux the penguin. You knew that.
Because the mascot for Linux is Tux.
Yeah, welcome to Know How, the show where we show you how to do stuff. Iyaz Akhtar, your host. I'm Leo Laporte, and Iyaz today is going to show us, now, a little bit of history here. You are standing across from a man, well, it's obvious I'm ancient, but I'm a guy who was, I think, the first to install the Linux, the free Linux operating system on national television back in 1998. In fact, do we have the video of me, Kate Botello, interviewing the guy who invented Linux, Linus Torvalds? It's on YouTube. You can actually see a little bit
for a little bit before it gets pulled down.
There's Linus. Yeah.
Right. Internet connection. Sure, go ahead and download it. You can actually install it off the net. So
that's an amazing thing. I've done that.
So this was don't show the young Leo Laporte. It's so
young Leo
depressing.
Laporte. Let's go to a time flash to now.
So Linux is the key to this.
That's right. So today I wanted to do something I've actually done at my own house, which was I have this really old ancient PC.
How old?
This is from 2003. Okay, 2003. This has an 8-pound laptop. It's running a Pentium 4 that has a 2.4 gigahertz clock speed, 512 megabytes of RAM. In other words, your phone kicks this thing's butt.
That's pretty funny, isn't it?
And right now, I'm messing with it to see, hey, if I wanted to install Windows 7 on it, what kind of issues would I run into? I use the little advisor.
The big issue here has got to be the memory, right? 512 megs of RAM is pretty small.
Yeah, the memory, the processor. Basically, if you're going to run XP on it, it's going to run pretty slowly.
Right.
That had XP to begin with.
Came with XP.
Yeah. So what I actually did, I was trying to launch things like iTunes, and a lot of applications get really heavy, right? Super heavy. But Linux has shown up and it's made it really easy, so we can always refresh this.
So one of the advantages of Linux is it's free. So it's easy to try. It doesn't cost you anything. You can download it from a lot of different places. And it's often designed to work on older hardware.
Well, that's the thing. So Linux has gotten really, really mature. Like
Let me
Ubuntu.
write this word, Linux, because that's what we're talking about here. This is a free operating system. And we just saw the guy who invented it. He's a graduate student in 1992, and he wanted to write his own operating system. His name is Linus Torvalds, and it was kind of a Unix-like operating system that he wrote. So Linus is Linux, I guess.
I believe the kernel itself is open source, so there are a lot of different versions of Linux out there, and they're called distributions or distros if you look it up. I mean, I'm sure you guys already know about that.
So you got the Linux kernel, and then you add a lot of software and an installer and all that stuff, and that makes it a distribution or distro. And there are hundreds of those. So we're going to talk about a couple that you might want to look at.
Yeah, one of the most popular ones these days is Ubuntu. It's really, really... it's really mature. But the problem with Ubuntu at this point is that it is so mature that some of the hardware requirements, if you get like the latest version, 12.0.4, I believe it's called, it might crush this laptop as well.
In fact, it's as heavy as Windows 7 is.
It's pretty hefty. Yeah. We're going to show it running on this, and you're going to see how exactly it works. Not exactly the best idea for a Pentium.
So is there a lighter weight Linux that I could use?
Yes, there's damn small Linux. I can't keep swearing on the show. I'll say
it's a good name.
DSL. 50 megabyte distribution, 50 megabytes, okay? This was meant to be running on like a business card sized CD back in the day. It's a tiny, tiny distribution, but it's a little rough around the edges, and it's not as pretty as another option that I quite like, which is called Puppy Linux. Now, Puppy Linux is about 120 megabytes large. It's tiny, and the thing is, it runs really well on something as ancient, again, as this Pentium 4.
So these are, how are they different though? I mean, they're all running the Linux operating system, right?
Yeah, well, what these distributions have, it's, well, not bloat, I want to say features, right? Ubuntu has a lot of software that comes along with it. Damn Small Linux has less, and Damn Small Linux has about the least amount you can get. And Puppy Linux has a mixture of applications you can have right out of the gate.
It's also the case that when they're building the Linux kernel, there are switches they can turn on that will say things, for instance, use multiple cores, don't run on a Pentium 3. So very frequently, something like Ubuntu, which is trying to be a modern operating system, is compiled in such a way that it just really won't run on older hardware. But these two, Damn Small Linux and Puppy Linux, are purpose-built. They're created for doing exactly what you're doing, running on older machines.
Now, I really like Puppy Linux because I found the documentation to be the easiest set of documentation I could find. Damn Small Linux, it works pretty well, but it's a little user-unfriendly when it comes to its website. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but I just really enjoy Puppy Linux.
So what are we going to do? We're going to do Puppy Linux today?
Yeah, so what we're going to do, go to puppylinux.org, and if we take my screen, you can see it. Pretty basic website. You can just download the latest release, and you can do that. You're going to download an ISO. Once you have that ISO, which I have on this desktop somewhere, you have to put it somewhere. You have to put it on a USB.
So the ISO is a CD image that you can download and then put on a CD, or in your case, you're going to put it on a USB key. And how big is this one?
How big is this distribution? It's about 120
So it's
megabytes.
not 120 megabytes.
Yeah.
That's a pretty quick download.
So like, I mean, you get these keys anywhere. People just,
Ubuntu is several gigabytes, so there's a big difference there.
Ubuntu, you can get up to 700 megabytes.
Oh,
So
that's right, because they want to put it on a single CD.
You can still fit it on a CD, but if you have an Ultrabook, you probably don't have an optical drive. We can show you how to, we'll have stuff in our show notes how to make all kinds of CDs, right? That's great, but these USB keys, they just throw them at you at this point.
Now, if this is a really old computer, will it boot to a USB key?
You definitely want to check your computer if it will be able to do that. When it starts up, it'll have an option saying, like, I think you click F12 to see what you can boot off of. And this one can boot off of a USB
So you're going to go into the BIOS setup. That's what happens before you boot into Windows. You'll see it'll say press Escape, Delete, or some key to go into BIOS setup, and then look at the boot order. If in the boot order you see USB,
pick that.
You're golden. Pick that.
This particular computer can do it with a drive, I mean, an actual CD if you have one.
And in fact, if it can't boot to a USB key, that's when you're going to burn a CD.
That's another thing. Well, the other thing is if your CD drive doesn't work anymore, you have an old PC, USB might still work where CD doesn't.
We even showed, and I think you saw that in the interview, that Linus showed us how to boot over the network. You can always get Linux on almost any hardware if you're ingenious enough. We'll do the easy way on a USB.
Well, one of the easiest ways I've found is something called UNetbootin.
I'm going to write that down. What is that?
Okay, now this is a cross-platform application that makes it really easy to take a distribution of Linux and make a bootable USB key. Now that bootable USB key is going to work on a bunch of PCs, so it's really simple.
This is on SourceForge, so
that's right.
You're going to go to UNetbootin on sf.net. Okay. And this is free. Everything we've talked about here is free.
Everything is free except this old PC you have. I'm sure people are willing to give these away at this point. Yeah. So I'm going to
actually, it's interesting. There are a lot of computer recycling centers that take old computers and recondition them for charities, churches, and schools. And very frequently, this is exactly how they do it. They'll put a Linux on it instead of trying to run Windows on it.
Now, UNetbootin has a pretty interesting hook to it. So you can go and select your distribution. If we go to my screen again, you can actually download directly from the application. So if you didn't download an ISO before, this will take care of it.
That's cool.
Now, it's going to take a while, but what we're going to do is use a disk image that we already have.
That's really cool. So it'll even look up for an ISO. And I noticed it wasn't just Linux ISOs. There were other rescue ISOs, FreeBSD.
There are so many options. And UNetbootin, I did have some issues with it on Mac OS X. It didn't make a bootable USB key. But everywhere else it's supposed to work. I'm not sure what the deal is with that.
Okay.
But then again, you're probably running it on a Windows machine.
As usual, you're using Windows.
Yes, using Windows for this. I'm going to install something called Browser Linux onto another USB key.
Now, what? Do you want to explain that?
Why Browser Linux?
What are you doing?
Okay, if we go to the UNetbootin.
I don't want to sidetrack you, but what is that?
What is Browser Linux? Well, Browser Linux is a special version of Linux that if you wanted to do light web browsing and maybe even flash video, you might be able to use this version of Linux.
So this is even lighter than the Puppy Linux we're going to install?
It's actually something called a Pupplet. It's a variant of Puppy Linux. There's a ton of these things.
I got it. So based on what you want to do, you could get an even more stripped down Linux.
And in this case, I mean, this laptop here, probably not going to do so hot with a lot of particular objects, but what I want to do is I want to browse the web with this. Check email, maybe go to Google Docs, that kind of stuff.
One good use for this could be your secure banking client, where you only do it one thing with it. You go online in your browser and you do secure banking, and Linux is more secure anyway, and that would be a great way to do this, and then you only do it for that.
And since we're going to do this with this little USB key, you're going to tell UNetbootin which drive to make a bootable drive. So you're going to go USB drive, and in our case, it's...
Now be careful with that, because if you did that to your internal hard drive, you could be very sad.
You don't want to do that to your internal hard drive. Make sure you know what drive
You don't want to format
letter
it and make it a boot installer.
In this case, it's drive E. We're going to hit OK, and then you'll see this go by. Are you sure you want to do this? Because I've already done this.
So this is that warning that you're going to overwrite something that's on a hard drive. And so be very careful here. This is the one thing you could kind of go wrong on, is accidentally put an ISO for Linux on your hard drive.
So you can see how fast that's actually installing. It takes
quick.
Because it's a small version of Linux. Now, I did this with Ubuntu, and it took about 10 minutes.
Okay.
So what I want to do is, I already made the Ubuntu one. I'm going to...
So we're connecting a USB key.
Right.
Into this, and we're going to reboot this computer from this.
From there. So this is going to be dangerous. Right, we're going to turn this off. Just hard turning it off because I don't really care. This machine, if it dies or lives, is okay. So let's wait. We're going to wait for this little thing up here. It's going to say hit F12 for boot options.
Aha, so you don't even have to change the BIOS settings. You can actually do that in the BIOS itself and say boot from the CD or the USB key.
Now, this machine is old, so it's going to take a while to start.
One of the neat things about modern Linux is you can run them from the boot device, from a CD or a USB key. You don't have to actually install them.
And that's what I wanted to do with these versions of Linux, because I don't know exactly how it's going to interact with this hardware. This is old hardware. It might not be able to work with the NVIDIA graphics card in here. It might not be able to work with the wireless card. And because we can create as many keys as we want, we can test out different distributions to the point where we have the ability to find out what's the best fit for our hardware.
Cool.
And we're waiting on this thing to continue. You can hear the fans going. Is it hanging up? It's hanging up.
It's not going to hang up.
It's going to hang up. Because
maybe it's because Leo's playing with the USB key. I should just probably put it down, shouldn't I?
You could try. I don't know if it's going to make a difference.
BIOS revision A03.
No, this isn't finishing.
Inspiron 80. Well, do it again.
Do it again.
Do it again, and I'll keep my hands off. This is the hands-off boot job.
Okay, let's do it. Hands-off boot job?
Yeah, that's what I call it.
That's an idea?
Yeah.
You hear the fans going. This is a really old machine. As Colin has pointed out, this has an incredibly bad design flaw. There's a fan under here that pretty much takes up all the dust and puts it on a heat sink, which makes this thing run very hot.
See, you're right. We were stuck. So now that was much faster.
So now we're going to pick.
So this is looking, okay, this is where we get to pick which storage device. All right.
We're going to go with our USB storage device.
All right. Okay. Let's see what happens.
And so since I made this with UNetbootin, really easy for me to say.
So you're getting a boot menu from the USB key at this point.
That's right. So it has a bootloader on there. So we're gonna try Ubuntu without installing. I said I'm gonna try. Hit T. I'll hit Tab to go to options.
Yeah, maybe it's hung up again.
It could be hanging up again.
It's going. Yeah, it did. Look, because it's frozen at 1 second.
Well.
Boy, you weren't kidding when you said this was a piece of junk computer.
It is something else. Well, let's try it. Maybe it's just this extension. Let's try that again.
You want to put it just right into the slot? We don't have to use an extension.
Yeah, let's turn that for ease.
Let's boot from the drive directly.
You can hear the fan still going.
Yeah.
I'm gonna wait for the fans to turn off.
Where'd you get this thing?
I got this.
This is what PC Magazine bought you for your work computer?
This is from my old law school days, actually.
Oh, wow.
We used to lug this around.
This is a piece of history here.
This was a 8-pound...
The screen's not in the best shape I've ever seen.
No,
See that? That doesn't look good.
It's aged a bit. I think we've all aged better than this laptop. And you can see right now, you can see this is supposed to say... It's supposed to say the Ubuntu logo there.
I would start one more time.
You could tell right now that it's not going to do well with the video
Make sure you
card.
got a full shutdown there.
All right.
I think it was still trying to boot from that USB key when we unplugged it. Yeah.
Okay. Tony, edit this out.
Uno más. No, this is what, one of the things that's kind of cool is to show this, because I think sometimes, we always did this on the screensavers. We didn't want to edit out the crashes because people then get a false sense of, well, gosh, why is this so hard to do? Press a letter. It says press a letter. So very important from Burke. He says press a letter. Any letter?
Well...
While you're in the menu.
Oh, yeah. No, he tried that. It was hung up.
Yep.
He did
Let's
try
give it
that.
a second. It seems like it's hot.
It's getting hot in here.
It's getting very hot.
I won't boot Ubuntu.
This is hilarious. Maybe we should just go to some other Linux.
It's a good thing to remember is that, you are using older hardware, and if there are issues with the older hardware, nothing's going to fix that. Okay, cross your fingers, folks. Everybody, okay.
Whatever you believe in.
If you believe in fairies,
start
I want
praying.
you to come to San Francisco. Clap 3 times, sorry. And then... And now we should get the boot menu, right?
That's what we should get.
Okay.
Good.
Go to USB storage device.
Good.
Okay.
We can move this around. Okay. Oh my gosh, we can do it.
We might
can
actually try Ubuntu.
Without
so
installing.
now it's going to boot up, not from its internal hard drive, which could be some of the problem. It's going to boot up from this USB key, and we're going to be able to use Ubuntu, except that I think it hung up again.
It possibly did. This is incredible.
No, I don't find it incredible.
Well, I guess the thing is I tried it out a bunch of times, right? And of course it worked. What is it doing? It's being hilarious.
It is a little dusty.
I think when you remove that magic dust layer off the front of the screen,
that was my mistake.
You heard it.
Wait,
it's doing something. It's doing something.
Do not be impatient. It's saying, yeah, and we can see, even though that the video isn't very good, we can see a little progress bar going. So maybe we're actually going to get an install here.
I think we're going to see
this. This is a good thing to see because it's the kind of thing that will happen when you're using older hardware and trying to get it to do stuff. And sometimes it'll be a little recalcitrant, a little bulky.
And it could be this giant.
I should write down that word.
Recalcitrant?
Recalcitrant.
It could be this giant version of Linux on top of it. This is Ubuntu. This is a powerful OS, and it's trying to run off that USB key, and it might be choking on that. So when we try something smaller, like Puppy Linux, I'm pretty sure it's going to run better. But of course,
this is what you were saying is that Ubuntu really isn't appropriate for this.
This thing.
So what you've got is, and almost every Linux does this now, is when you download that ISO file, it is a bootable version of Linux. You could put on a USB key, you could put on a CD, and literally before you install it, try it on hardware to see if it runs well, to see if it works okay. And that's a really good use now. Is it actually booting up?
It's actually booting up.
Oh my gosh, it did boot up.
It took a while.
The resolution is really high on this.
Yeah, this is a really particular laptop. It has like a 1920 by 1200 display.
That's cool.
So
look at that.
But it does take a while, as you saw booting off of that flash drive.
That's key. And if it were a CD, it would take even longer because these things are much slower than hard drives. But it does give on the plus side, it gives you a chance, and I would recommend this, to run all these programs, maybe run Skype, see if the camera works, see how many of the devices, the drivers, everything work out of the box. And that's why they do this with Ubuntu and all these other Linuxes, is to give you a chance to try before you buy, in effect, by installing.
Yeah. Now, if you could take a look at the mouse cursor on the screen, I don't know if you can catch this. It's not frozen, but you can see this extra trail there.
Something wrong.
There's something wrong with the video drivers and this machine. So I don't want to use this version of Linux then, because if this is my experience, because the live version is going to be very close to the actual install, I might not want this. And we saw that install. We tried to see it boot up. It took a really long time.
One other thing I'd point out is that every Linux has a different desktop manager. This is using one that Ubuntu seems to like called Unity that is very heavy, I think. So that's another thing. All Linuxes don't look alike on the desktop.
Absolutely
they all look
not.
different. But the good news is this is plug and play. You can change the desktop manager to something else if you want.
Let's just change the entire operating system.
All right, reboot. As soon as you shut down, I'll pull the plug.
Yes, shut down, machine.
But you know what? It did run.
It did run. It does take a while, but I mean, the experience of Ubuntu is really friendly. So if you're used to the whole Windows world or OS 10, it's really familiar, but not necessarily for this kind of old machine. I mean, this is getting crushed.
I'm going to pull this. So that key right there, that's an Ubuntu boot disk.
Okay,
let's try. What is this? Small Linux?
This is a Puppy Linux.
Puppy Linux.
I'm going to go with Puppy Linux. It does make that sound.
It does?
Yeah, and it terrifies my dogs. Now, Ubuntu actually, when it starts up, makes like a bongo noise when it starts up. Puppy Linux, for some reason, go figure, barks twice when it starts up. Oh, I forgot to hit the button.
And they're pointing out in the chat room, this is absolutely true. Because this is an older machine, it's probably USB 1.1, might even be older than that. So that's slow also, obviously.
Absolutely.
It's not USB 2 here.
Forgot to hit the boot menu there.
Oh, I mistyped kernel. Let me fix that.
You mistyped it? Where's the red squiggly?
Yeah, that's the problem. There's no red squiggly.
Picking the USB storage
device?
device?
It's not kernel as in corn. It's kernel as in operating system. Kernel the... Oh, look! It's cute!
This is much faster.
You could see immediately.
It is completely different when it comes to this. And you might hear the bark, you might not. So what it's going to do is actually install, or it's going to load Puppy Linux into RAM. So it's going to be a really fast experience because it's small enough to fit fully in RAM. So 512 megabytes.
It says loading drivers needed to access disk drive, searching for puppy files in computer disk drives, loading the main file. You're right, this is going very quickly.
This is a totally different beast because we're talking about 120 megabytes going into RAM.
We've come so far. I mean, those early days when we first installed Linux on the screensavers, you would have to find drivers for the hardware. It wouldn't necessarily come with it. It wasn't like installing Windows at all. This is more like installing Windows, where most of what you need is already there. It senses what kind of screen. We used to have to go through a whole step-by-step process of what the screen was, the resolution, the refresh rate. All of that is so much simpler nowadays. Look at that.
There it goes. You heard the barking? I don't know if you heard the barking.
We're here.
And there we go. We have a version of Linux running around. So this is much faster. Obviously, you're seeing it move, and you can hear the fans going again. But it's going to ask you to personalize your settings. It's kind of not the prettiest look to it, but it's more polished than damn small Linux.
I think it looks pretty good, and it's very lightweight, which is a real advantage.
So we can go to internet. We can pick out something like, we can try to get Flash if we wanted to. It has a browser built in. There are some applications built in here, but this is more about trying it out before you go into installation. We're going to try to install Chrome. We have a network cable here.
All of this is running from the USB key still. We haven't touched the hard drive.
Right.
That's another thing. If you want to continue to run Windows, you can do that and just run Linux from this USB drive.
So it's
if you
want
to really secure Linux, boot it from a CD, which can't be written to, and then you have a very secure situation.
That's a great point. I'm just thinking about the old days, though. You also had to get the live CD separate. Remember that from the install CD? Right. That was a totally different thing, and that's all gone.
Right.
So it's really simple. Right now we're installing Chrome, and we're going to see what the web experience is like on Puppy Linux. It might not be the greatest.
So you didn't have to set up your network here? It just kind of recognized it and did it?
I hooked up an Ethernet cable. You can do wireless. There is a
It
wireless
is a lot easier if you don't have to enter wireless settings. Just to seize the Ethernet and it works.
I totally agree with that. It's way easier to do Ethernet, but I did get it working on wireless in my house.
That's impressive too, that it had the drivers for whatever weird Ethernet card and wireless card was in here. That's pretty good.
It used to be that they didn't have drivers for Broadcom. That's why, if you can see this, I have a PCMCIA card here. This is old school 802.11.
Did you just disconnect now?
Well, that doesn't matter. We're using wired anyway, but this is an extraordinarily old piece of technology. Remember PCMCIA? Well, PC cards.
Yeah.
Excuse me, they changed the name. But yeah, that's what I used to use when I used to use old Linux
it's an
on
old
this.
Linksys card. Wow.
Yeah. It was back when Linksys was Linksys.
Yeah.
So it's installing. It's taking its sweet time. It's going to take like 8 minutes to do that. But what you're going to find is that Flash on this, probably not going to work so hot on this. There are lots of different things you can do, like that version of browser Linux I just installed, or I have here. We could try that if we wanted to.
Now, one thing that initially used to throw me when I was using these try before you install disks is I would be running Linux, I'd be going great, and I said, well, now how do I install this? Because I like it. So now how do I install it?
That's a great question. And most of these distributions actually have in their menus an area where you can install it. It's just right in the menu. So if I can go to this screen.
So be browsing around in the menu, and you will find.
I believe it's let's see, setup.
Somewhere.
Yeah, it says setup, and it has here. This also has the ability to make its own bootable USB keys if you wanted to.
That's neat.
It says universal installer, so you can install it anywhere, including the hard drive on this machine, right from the distribution.
So your advice is to try before you install, see if everything works, run Chrome. Take some time. Obviously, it's going to take too long for us to do all of that, but try the stuff that you might be using and see if it runs well, see if all the hardware works, the drivers work, and if it does, now you just go to that menu and you say install, and you can actually put it on the hard drive.
There are so many options out there, too, because if you want to go to, like, a Mint version of Linux, or you want to have that browser-based version, or you want to just have an office production kind of suite, there's actually one Puplet that's about video editing. So if you want to have that built for that machine, you can try out so many different versions of it. And because of how easy it is to make these keys, trying it out isn't that bad an idea, because what do you have to lose?
Here's the Wikipedia page for Linux distros. There are literally hundreds, and of course, Iyaz has chosen one, but there are people in the chat room say, oh no, you've got to try Ubuntu, or you've got to try Zorin, or you've got to try Mint. So there's so many different ones, and this is one of those areas where people kind of have their strong favorites. But I think you're right. I think this is a good start on older hardware to try Puppy Linux. I think it's a good choice.
Again, the
we still are not through scrolling.
The documentation of Puppy Linux I really like. Ubuntu, again, has great documentations. Because there are so many different versions, you will find tons of forum threads. And that's when it gets really hard to find out, what exactly am I supposed to do?
Right.
That's why we put together this kind of tutorial. It's really simple to do this. And if you're just using what's it called again? I keep forgetting the name. UNetbootin. you can just pick from that drop-down menu and just keep picking all kinds of distributions.
I like that. I'd never heard of that. So you gave me some good tips. Can I run through now
Go for it.
what we just learned? So what we're going to do is we're going to resurrect an old PC by installing the free open source Linux operating system. Linux really refers to the kernel, which Linus Torvalds originally wrote, and he still manages this. This is a trademark. So Linux is still Linux, but distros vary widely. There are quite a few different distros designed for quite a few different purposes. If you're running a really old PC, you're going to look for a distribution that is designed for older hardware. The big one that everybody seems to like and use on modern hardware is Ubuntu, ubuntu.com. That's free. But Iyaz recommends you take a look at Damn Small Linux at damnsmalllinux.org. And we decided to install Puppy Linux at puppylinux.org. Finally, I don't know if you can see this, it's kind of way down on the screen. We also recommended, or Iyaz also recommended, a shareware open source program that will help you, freeware, not shareware, that will help you make a boot USB key or boot disk UNetbootin at unetbootin.sourceforge.net. And be patient, because sometimes hardware can be a little recalcitrant, especially older, dusty hardware.
Patience
like
is definitely something that if you wanted to be patient, you could stick to XP on this machine. You could wait all day and wait. It took me, it's been 20 minutes to get that Windows 7 upgraded visor to give me results, because I pushed the button, I went to lunch, and I came back, and it was still going. So you can always blow out the OS and put XP back to its old original way. I'm sure it runs fine.
Recalcitrant.
But there's so many things you can do, so many different versions of Linux out there, and I'm sure we're going to get tons of emails about, oh, you didn't try this? You didn't try that?
Everybody's got their favorite.
It's like, I don't know what, it's like snowflakes. There's so many different individual.
I think this is a good one to start with. I like the little barking dog.
Try Puppy Linux. If you have dogs in your house, it might drive them nuts like mine. But you can send us your feedback at knowhow@twit.tv, or you can send us a voicemail even. I think, what's the phone number here? It's like
408-800-KNOW.
You happen to know the phone number. That's good.
I've been calling it, breathing heavily. Did you get those?
Oh, that's the guy. Yeah. You're the guy?
408-800-KNOW.
K-N-O-W. I think that does it for us.
Well, now that you know how,
do it now.
Go out and do it. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time on Know How. Good job, Iyaz. Wow, that was fun.